aren't afraid to rewrite the script. I'm Kristyn Medeiros, and if you've ever felt stuck in toxic patterns or like the right path turned out to be completely wrong for you, today's episode is going to hit home. Our guest is Meagan Crowe, a recovery guide, breathwork facilitator, and all around powerhouse. She has rebuilt her life twice. Once when she got sober after a rock bottom moment that almost cost her and someone else their lives, and again just this past year after going through a divorce, losing her father, her job, and her identity as she knew it. Meagan believes that true recovery, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual, doesn't start in the mind, it starts in the body. Through plant medicine, breath work, and a whole lot of inner work, she's discovered a path that not only saved her life, but gave it deeper meaning. Meagan, welcome to Flying Upstream.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, so let's start at the beginning of your transformation journey. 11 years ago, when you got sober, what happened in your life that made you realize something had to change?
Sure. So at that time, I was failing out of grad school and I was getting in a lot of legal trouble. Obviously, I'd been drinking for about 10 years at that point. So life was really going downhill. But the biggest motivating factor for me was really I had an infant son. And I had another legal event. I got pulled over for a DUI, and I realized that if I didn't turn my life around in that moment, I was going to lose my child, and that was really the motivation that I needed to get sober.
Yes, I can totally understand that. It's a totally different story once you're responsible for another human, especially a tiny little helpless human. And yeah, kind of realizing like you are that person that they have in the world. And it is your responsibility to make sure that they at least make it to adulthood
Yeah.
safely. So, yeah, I absolutely can understand that. I have two little kids. So I've been there. I've had that moment where I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
this is real. This is very real. Now, you've said that undiagnosed ADHD and a lifetime of shame were a huge part of your story and may have even fueled your drinking. So going back in time, can you walk us through that realization and what was a childhood like for you?
Sure. So, as a younger person, I think I've always just really struggled with being overstimulated, for one. I didn't feel the same ease in social situations. So I always felt a little bit awkward. And I really struggled with just irritability and my ability to regulate my nervous system. And so for years, I think I was getting picked on. I wasn't fitting in. I was really struggling just to manage my emotional self. And that led to the drinking. And then once I got diagnosed and kind of thinking back, I realized how much that drinking behavior was likely a coping mechanism where I was trying to like numb and reduce all of that stimuli that was, constantly causing me to be in an unregulated state.
Yeah. I'm guessing you probably felt pretty alone during that time, the early years.
Yeah, I remember, many times describing that I felt like I was screaming in a room where people were covering their ears. It was never that I was alone, but I wasn't seen or acknowledged or witnessed in all of my truth. And, between the drinking and my poor relationship I had with myself, that really paved the way for me to have a lot of other toxic relationships in my life. So emotionally, I was very alone for a large part of my growing up, I would say.
Hmm. Yes, I've heard that when people have addictions, it's because they feel either alone or, as you've said, unseen, unheard, unwitnessed, just not getting that attention. And I don't mean attention like in a negative way, but not getting that attention to have that like green light that it's okay to be who you are, and
Yeah.
instead getting the signal that there's something wrong with you, and to a large enough degree that people blame you, you're a nuisance, you're all these kinds of terrible things, and then that just gets so internalized, it's really hard to get past that all on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And the drinking behavior itself, obviously, I wasn't always acting, in productive, healthy ways. And so there was also a lot of evidence that what people were saying was true. So while people might have been perceiving my irritability or my discomfort, it was always reflected back to me as if I had a personality flaw, which when you factor in the drinking and some of those behaviors, I did. So it's been really interesting to parse out like what was actually a negative aspect of my personality to take accountability for versus what was something that I was actually struggling with that now I need to learn to accommodate.
Yeah, and that's a really good point is kind of separating who you are as a person versus who you are when you were drinking and all of those things because I know alcohol does lead to increased anxiety, increased depression, and just kind of cutting that out of the mix and then saying, okay, what's left? Who is Megan? Who am I really when we take that away?
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
I think you have that experience with the ADHD too, it's like I don't know how much of my personality is, dysfunction in my brain, like in both good and bad ways. So it's been a really
Yeah.
interesting journey to just kind of learn about all of that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. So you had this big realization, you have a newborn child, you decide to get sober. So after getting sober, you decided to go all in. You got your master's, you had this amazing career, you testified in state legislatures, you worked in
Mhm.
high-level education consulting. On paper, it looked like the American dream, right? You cleaned up your life, you had this awesome career, good education, but was it what you actually wanted?
I think in some ways parts of it were, I had the opportunity to feel very successful to support some other really impressive leaders and that felt very satisfying. But I think what never really went fully addressed was my relationship with myself. So which again made the way for a lot of other toxic relationships to come in. And it also, I was constantly measuring myself. Was I good enough? Was I doing enough? Was I valid in having a reaction or a feeling to something? Or should I be beating myself up for having that reaction or that feeling? And so it was just years of constantly figuring out whether or not I was kind of allowed to exist in however I felt I needed to. And that, of course, was super unfulfilling over time.
Yeah. Do you feel like you had some moments where you realized that limiting beliefs that you were raised with were not true and that freedom of shedding those?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest messages that I got as a child was about success. And it's you go to school and you get a higher ed degree and you get in a C suite and then you retire with money. And, continuing to pursue kind of that goal, it was like the bar always moved. I was satisfied for 9 months and then I always wanted more. And but what was always missing in that pursuit was I was never able to fully express every aspect of myself. So I'd get really acknowledged for some of my skill sets, but some of these other parts of my personality were very much rejected. And so it kind of, it creates this cognitive dissonance where you're pursuing something that you think is like the pursuit of happiness, but then you're really experiencing conflict on that journey and then looking at all of these other leaders who were frustrated and overworked and underpaid and I'm just like gosh, is that really what I'm going after? So
Yeah.
kind of now realizing I get to choose what my version of success is and it's not necessarily the one that was given to me as a child.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, that's monumental. And I agree with you so much on this point. I've had similar experience where I was in the corporate world for a long time, worked hard, I had a good salary, but then it's like compared to what? And same thing, I would
Mhm.
look at my boss who was working I mean almost 24/7. And yeah, you have that moment of like this is what I'm trying to be, this
Yeah.
person who is, in their 50s or 60s and still on the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
no sign of slowing down. And while I don't doubt that they were smart and intelligent and kind, all these things, but what kind of life was that? That's what I finally realized too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and constantly squeezing into that professionalism box. You know, it's like there are a lot of expectations around how you present and communicate. And it just, especially in the realm I was in, serving government officials and managing large federal grants where you had to be really careful with how you spoke and presented information. It just didn't even give room to like maneuver as a full human.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a huge realization. So, okay, so now your life's on track. You've got this on paper anyway, this amazing
Sure.
career.
Yeah.
And now, almost a year ago, your life unraveled all over again. Your marriage ended, your dad passed away, you lost your job. Now, that's a brutal trifecta. What was going through your mind during that time?
Uh, I mean, initially when my marriage was ending, I was just having a really hard time coping at all. And then with my father passing, I had then gotten to a little bit better place with my grief. But I think, after losing my job, I just kind of threw my hands up and I was like, okay, well, if we're going to clear this much space in my life, then clearly this must be making room for something else to come in. So now I'm trying to hold space for all the very valid feelings that come from the insane year that I've had, and also try to be faithful and curious about what there's now room for that wasn't there before.
Mm, that's so beautiful. And what a positive way to look at things because I mean, the reality is everybody goes through difficult times, right? To varying degrees for sure, but we all have that. And being able to have that outlook, you really are making room for something new. And I want to share something that stuck with me from when we spoke before this. You said you were applying to jobs and you realized I'm not the person who does this kind of work anymore.
Mhm.
What did that shift feel like for you at this moment in your life?
Well, the day that it happened, it was funny. I was still employed the first time that I sat down at my desk and was like, "Oh, I don't want this job anymore. I don't want to pursue this next credential." And I was surprised, but also scared because it feels a little bit like you're going crazy, because it's like you've invested in this one version of yourself and you know what you're skilled at. You've been doing it for years. And then all of a sudden you wake up and it's like, oh, this is very much not aligned anymore. And I think, processing the diagnosis on top of it has also kind of made me question my own sanity and centeredness in space some days. And it also just felt like kind of a big spiritual kick in the butt too, that it's like, okay, you're done, time to go do something else. So it also has been permissioning, but like really a mix of feelings and realizations with that.
Yeah, I like what you said about the mixed feeling of realizing this is not for you anymore and it's okay to let that go, but also the sadness of realizing you've invested so much of your life in on this path and having to change to another path, the one that is right for you, still so hard. And I would think maybe that's why so many people stay on a path that they know deep down is not right for them. It's not truly fulfilling their soul and their heart, but having to change is so difficult and it really does require going inside to yourself and having a deep conversation with yourself.
Yeah, and I love that you named the sadness. That has been one of my biggest like ahas through this process, is not only am I grieving the loss of my marriage and my father and my career, but I'm grieving the loss of versions of myself. Even a year later, like a week or two ago, I was just letting some emotions move through and I realized how much there's a version of me that had to exist to get through this last year. There's a story that I've now told on repeat as like, okay, this is who I am now. And now I feel like I'm kind of getting to the end of that. And so it's like, well, if it's not this grief story, if it's not this transformation human, like who am I next? And there's a grieving in growth and becoming a next version. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I think goes unrecognized a lot because people are always on to the next, what's next? Just
Mhm.
keep looking forward. But there is a lot of value in staying still for a moment, recognizing that, just being there, and then moving forward, even if it means staying in an uncomfortable place for a little bit, it's still
Mhm.
worth it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in the midst of all this grief, you discovered breath work
I
and then
did.
everything changed. So, what happened in your first session that cracked you open?
Yeah. So I say my first session, it was a Saturday, Sunday, back to back, but in my mind, they're very kind of, one event. But I breathed really hard for 45 minutes. I'd never heard of breath work. I had no idea what this experience was. And they were doing one of the really activating, like, fast and intense. And I cried and I screamed from like my toes and I just let
Oh,
out some full like primal emotions. And then I got some intuition that I was supposed to do something else. I felt for a long time like I had some other purpose, like there was going to be some meaning. And I really felt called during those sessions to like find out what that is. And the experience themselves were so profound, um, that I just immediately had to go figure out what breath work was and figure out how to do this myself. So, yeah.
yeah. I mean, that sounds like a huge moment in your life, kind of again changing everything for you. And I know you've talked about the body holding wisdom and breath being a doorway to something deeper. What does that mean to you, and how has it changed the way that you're living?
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, there's a lot of science in how our bodies hold stress and trauma. And when we're not releasing, we're not processing that can, lead to disease. There's lots of different modalities that look into that. So, first off, the breath work has really helped me get out of my mind and my mental processing and dip into different parts of my physicality. Sometimes that looks like I'm having, visuals or I'm getting business insights. Other times I just feel nice, and it's relaxing. In other sessions, I might really cry and just, there have been a couple where I felt like my dad came and, gave me some words and I'll cry thinking about it. But every session is different. And the breath work and getting into the body, it's like there's so much knowledge and awareness and voice that our physicality has that we ignore. And so tuning into those has really allowed me to deepen my relationship with myself in so many aspects. So I'm just like more aware of when I'm hungry. I'm more aware of when my body wants to move. I'm more aware and allowing when I'm tired. And so learning to follow my body's cues is just generally improving, I think, me as an individual, but it's also really permissioning me to love, sounds cliche, but like learn to love myself first. And that's absolutely changing the boundaries and the rules that I have about how I engage my energy and who I engage with.
And that's huge. Like I know you're saying, oh, it sounds cliche to learn to love yourself, but
Yeah.
I would argue the vast majority of people on the planet both don't love themselves and don't even know how to begin on that journey. Like,
Yeah.
that's huge. Now, I want to switch a little bit because you've also experienced plant medicine journeys, and I'm really curious,
Yeah.
what did they reveal to you about your life's purpose?
Oh, so in one particular evening, I've been on a few plant medicine journeys in Peru. I've done ayahuasca and bufo, and San Pedro. So I've dabbled some, but mostly that I was here to process, not just my own experience and trauma, but maybe that familial, that generational trauma that gets passed down. Again, there's science showing that we have generational trauma that can be passed down through our DNA. So one of the messages was that I was here to process some of that. And also that the work that I'm doing will hopefully make my son's path easier, that he too chose a difficult path with purpose, and that the work that I'm doing will hopefully make his journey easier.
That's so beautiful. I so appreciate that. Well, Meagan, you've taught us so much. And as we wrap up here, we've got one more question for you.
Yeah.
You've said that everything in your life, your sobriety, your losses, your awakening, was preparing you to help others come home to themselves. What does it really mean to come home to yourself? And what's waiting for people when they finally do?
Hmm. I think really coming home to yourself is first nurturing that relationship that you have with all of you. Allowing yourself to have your feelings, allowing yourself to ask for help when you need it, rest when you need it, to learn your own rhythms and the way that you can help accommodate yourself to be the best version of you. And I'll say, between getting sober 10 years ago and this journey that I've been on recently, I realized I was learning kind of the same lesson the whole time. And that was to not self abandon. That was to learn who I am, to respect and care about who I am. And as I have been more and more able to do that, other aspects of my life are improving. I just generally feel happier. My relationships are improving. New people are coming in. New opportunities are showing up. And from a spiritual standpoint, I really believe that as we improve and turn in and heal ourselves, we're healing little bits of each other. And like the world around us responds to that shift in energy. So I think there's a lot of possibility open to people who are willing to go inside and do this work, because it just opens you up to yourself, which in turn opens up the world.
That is so beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Just such an incredible journey you've been on, Meagan. And thank you so much for sharing your story with such honesty and soul. You have lived the truth that many of us are only starting to wake up to, that recovery isn't just about sobriety or grief or burnout. It's about remembering who we are under the noise. To everyone listening, our free spirits out there, if you've ever felt like you're too far gone or too broken to begin again, this episode is proof that you are not. Your breath, your body, your healing, it's all still available to you. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and of course, keep flying.